Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage. I'm your host and ambassador for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by James Ford, who is EV sales specialist at Drax Energy Solutions. Hi, James.
Hi there.
We have spoken before, but this is your first GreenFleet Talks.
It is, yes. Yeah, I've done a webinar with you, but this is the first talk session.
Okay. Well, I promise to be gentle with you, although I know that you are a seasoned pro in the world of e-mobility. So I'm sure that we're going to have a great conversation. Let's kick off, James, with why some people may not have heard of Drax. So if you could just give us an overview as to why Drax is so well positioned to provide EV charging services.
Yeah, of course. So Drax are very well positioned because we consider ourselves to be energy experts. We have energy supply, we work across things like PPAs and general renewable technology that supports people to come across to net zero. So in terms of the EV proposition, we are completely hardware agnostic. We have an in-house installation, surveying, maintenance team, which I think is quite a USP. And then we've got, of course, the software that you have in the back offices to allow people to monitor their fleets and also allow the chargers or the drivers to actually jump on and pay for the charging. So we've got all the different elements that I think you need to build up to be that proper full turnkey partner for EV charging. And lots of experts internally as well across energy and also EV.
Indeed, and I know many of them, and I would agree with that wholeheartedly, James. I'm glad you mentioned PPAs, power purchase agreements, not for this discussion today, but I think this is such an important topic for fleets. Maybe not yet, depending on how much energy they're consuming, but in the future, I think it's going to be absolutely crucial to controlling their fuel costs, for want of a better expression.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we've got lots of experts internally that can support with those. Lots of people who are far more clever than I am in that area, but we have those experts in-house.
Yeah, brilliant, good. Let's go back to the beginning, James. It's the beginning of the year and it's quite nice to do a refresh. There are still fleets who haven't begun their fleet decarbonisation, and electric vehicles seems like an obvious place to start. So how can fleet operators understand whether EVs would be suitable for their operations?
Yes, it's a really good question, and I think something that's slightly different for each of the different fleet operators. What we like to encourage in the first instance and what we like to support people with is we almost carry out a fleet electrification assessment. So that would be, if they've got telematics data, fantastic, because that collects a lot of that for you that then you can start analysing. But otherwise, you'll probably have information about kind of mileage your vehicles are driving, the routes that they might be travelling, routines. So are they starting from the depot at the start of the day and coming back at the end, or do they come back at lunchtime where they could have a quick burst? And also what types of vehicles have they got? So looking at all of these kind of factors, you can start seeing that maybe you've got a couple of categories of vehicles that would be really easy to transition quite quickly. And then equally some that are going to be slightly more complicated. There is tech out there, but you might be waiting for something that just means it's slightly easier for you. I think that you're very rarely going to have a fleet where you can just do everything on day one. Yeah. And I think the way to do it is to start looking at maybe ways that you can chip away, have trials, really test things. And that helps with making sure you're deploying the right tech, but also making sure that people are engaged, making sure that they see what's coming along. But other things to think about are potentially what grants you can have a look at there. And these are all things that we can support people with in helping to understand really where to start. And I hate the term low-hanging fruit, but I think that's where everybody looks at to start with. There are definitely some easier bits than to go for.
I do use the term low-hanging fruit. I am guilty as charged. But really, why make your life any more difficult than it needs to be? And there's no law that says you have to do this all in one day, or indeed that you have to do this over a concentrated period of time. You and I both know that. The webinar that we did recently, we had a case study from Warwick University, and he started started 10 years ago and is at 70%. I think that's realistic. That is a steady pace of change and learning about your infrastructure as you go. So start with the easy stuff. And I think also, James, because the landscape has moved a lot in the last 5 years. The advice that you've given is great. Probably less concerning for cars because the public charging infrastructure is so good if the vehicle is doing longer journeys. But for vans, that payload and range consideration, particularly if they're used, 8 hours a day, I think is still a challenging one.
I think so, and that's what a lot of the customers that we're working with are facing, and they're working with some smart consultancies, and we can support too to understand maybe which depots can go first. And again, it's just a case of trying some different tech out and seeing what works well, seeing what you can optimize. Can you just put a few less tools in the van that day? That means you can go a little bit further and weigh a bit less. So
there's a lot to take into account.
I think so, and I think when you're looking and understanding whether EV is suitable, you're likely to have some kind of net zero target for the business, which might be 2030, might be 2050. But I'd just say don't wait until a couple of years before and then try and do everything at once. Like you've just said about Warwick Uni, it's taken them 10 years to get to 70%, and I think that's good going. So
I think it's good going.
You just want to chip away at it and kind of test things as you're going and make sure you've got the right partners and get going with it.
Yeah, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And your point about testing things is probably now, because there is so much choice in terms of suppliers, both for hardware, software, maintenance, that really understanding how that all hangs together is probably quite big learning. I may have moved the conversation on a little bit. So if it's decided that workplace and fleet charging would be needed, what are the key points to consider before embarking on the infrastructure project?
So I think the big thing to look at to start with would be driving patterns. So the types of vehicles you've got, how far are they driving? It again comes back to the mileage. Do they stop regularly throughout the day? So could they have a quick burst when they're out on the road? Or do you think they could just go drive for the whole day, then come back to the depot at the end of the day? The reason that's really important is that can start dictating the kind of charging that you could put in there. So I think that would then start guiding us to look at, say, site supplies. How much capacity have you got? What can we put in to start with? What kind of future proofing do we require? So I think that's like an early question to look at, maybe which chargers you put on site. Things you can also consider is, have you got an existing roaming partner? So have you got a card that you can have in the van? So if you do want to get back to the depot at the end of the day, but you don't have quite enough juice, can you plug into a charger on the way home without individuals having to incur costs on themselves because they've got a fleet card in the van? So there's different partnerships you can consider there. I think as well, so you can start having a look at costs as well. So what can we do to future-proof? And with the costs, can we say, if you know that vehicles maybe have enough mileage to last for 2 days, can we put in half the number of chargers compared to the vehicles? So just trying to make sure that we're optimizing everything, getting the most from your money from what you put in there, really sweating it before you then decide to maybe expand that in the future.
Sorry, and I think, James, what you're saying there is this automatic assumption that you need one charge point for one vehicle. It can be flawed, particularly if you've got very low mileage vehicles.
It can be. I think, everybody just assumes that you need to plug in everything at the end of every day, but it's often not the case. And it's similar that I said on the webinar, that I think there's the assumption that you need to have the quickest type of charging in every single location, when really that's probably the most expensive and least efficient way to go about it. So that's kind of going back to what I was saying about the fleet assessment in the first instance. Yeah. You can probably realise that a 7 kilowatt charger is more than enough for your vehicle, and that might be every other day. If it's something quicker, then we can look at something quicker. But that's when we can, again, look at capacity and start giving you some guidance on how much things might cost and how you could do things most effectively.
Yeah, and that capacity piece is so important. You know, the first thing you need to do is establish how much power you've got available, and that may, in some cases, influence your charging strategy.
It could do, and where you do need to do a DNO upgrade potentially, that's something we can support with, and there's different financing options as well that are available there. So you don't need to assume that if you can't come off your existing supply that suddenly it's going to be cost prohibitive, because there are lots of options out there that we can help with.
Yeah, great, good. You mentioned before, James, about driver engagement, which I think we agree is crucial. So what should employers be thinking about to make sure their drivers are accepting of their electric vehicle and confident in charging it?
I think the biggest thing here is communication with staff or with the people that are going to be driving. And not even just the people that will be driving from day one, it's the people that will eventually be looking at driving the EVs. So that could be from the point that your business decide that, yeah, I think EVs could actually work for us now. And you'll then start embarking on the journey around infrastructure, chargers, suppliers. Just letting people know that it's on the horizon might mean that suddenly they're quite interested. They start doing their own research and they start kind of gluing themselves up a little bit with things. I think with, say, fleets, you can do things around internal webinars. So the likes of Drax would be more than happy to support customers.
Yeah.
And that's just around making sure you've got the right buy-in. It could be as simple as just telling somebody how to plug a vehicle in, because coming to EV is different to driving an ICE vehicle. People are used to standing at a pump for 2 minutes whilst they fill up, then disappearing. Having that mind shift to get back to the depot at the end of the day, plug the vehicle in, tap your card, then walk off. It's quite a shift.
Yeah.
But to make sure that it's effective and to make sure that van does get charged at the end of the day, so it's charged the following morning, just having those kind of steps in place to bring people on board and just get them around behaviour is really important.
Yeah. To give this whole transition its best possible start, it's all about focusing on the drivers, and of course be prepared for the naysayers, because they're out there. There are very few people that I meet, not just through work but in general, who haven't got an opinion about electric vehicles, whether it's good or bad. It's quite a polarizing topic.
It is,
and there is a lot of fake news out there. So myth busting and re-education, I think, is really important. Absolutely.
I think the kind of stories that get into the press are the negative ones.
Yeah.
So it's nice to start giving some of the good news stories out there. And that's the kind of stuff you can drip feed to people as you're going. And from the fleets that I work with, I do hear about people who are really reluctant to get into an EV, and they just think, I'm going to spend my whole day charging. I'm not going to get any mileage on this. But actually, when they get in it, they realise it's a much nicer driving experience. And it's so much better than they were expecting it to be. Yeah. And they actually don't want to then drive the petrol or diesel vehicle.
Yeah, and that's been the case. That's been the case since the very early days. That the people that do those early adopters, almost without exception, said, I'm not getting out of this vehicle now. Thank you.
No. Whereas where we see people that say maybe there's 10 vehicles on a depot and they do 2 at a time. If somebody drives the EV, then they want to keep driving the EV. They don't want to go back into the other vehicles again.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And
it is interesting. Yeah.
I think depending on which leasing company as well, if you lease them or where you purchase them from, depending on which one you work with, you might also be able to get a test vehicle. So actually being able to get people to sit in them, drive them, just experience them can be a really good way to make people realise that it's the future. They're absolutely brilliant. So kind of get involved and enjoy it.
Yep, or a lease or a contract hire vehicle that you get specifically for employees to try to test out. Yeah.
And then also, sorry, I didn't mention, but you've got the ongoing training as well that you can offer. So that's refresher training for people if they once drove one, then have dropped out of them for a while, then they're coming back. But also onboarding. So when you've got new staff joining, make sure that you give them the training. Don't just assume that they'll know what to do when they turn up.
Yeah, very good point.
And all the kind of things that we can support with the Drax.
Very good point. And each electric vehicle is slightly different. So if someone's changing from one to another, maybe understanding that the charging speed of this vehicle is faster or slower, or where
the charge point is on the car. So it can all differ.
Yeah. Again, a whole other GreenFleet talks, James, which I look forward to discussing with you. Let's wrap up with what help and support is out there for fleets who are starting that electrification journey.
I think a problem could be that there's almost too much support out there. There's lots and lots of opinions out there. There's lots of guidance that you can read, and it's probably hard to know where to start. If you're coming into this without having any kind of prior experience, there's just a sudden information dump that you need to try and dig through and figure out kind of where to even start. So I think my suggestion on this would be around just trying to find the right partner. So if, say, you were to work with Drax as a CPO, we could be advising you on this. It could be a vehicle leasing company that you work with on this. They could be pushing, or they could be guiding you down the right routes. I think depending on who you talk to, people are, particularly on the leasing side, some are probably better at others than talking about EVs. For some, it's still a bit of an unknown, so they might try and guide you down the petrol or diesel route just because that's what they know. But when you start looking at, say, working with a CPO, we can talk to you about things like the fleet assessments. We can start looking at the data with you, the vehicles with you. We'll have some charges that we can show you. We can take you through the back office to say this is the kind of information that you can expect, that you can then put into your CSR reporting. I think a lot of it is just around making sure you've got the right partner. So another example of where we can support is we work with things like the government funding options. So we can say across this kind of installation, this is the kind of support that you can get from the government in terms of the financing.
Because there are still grants for workplace, aren't there?
There are. They've actually just renewed that, which is a brilliant prompt there. Yeah, they've just refreshed it for the next year.
Yeah.
So they've got until next April now, and that's still £350 a socket. Of course, different eligibility. So we'd have to kind of work with businesses to make sure they are eligible for those. But because we're doing this on the day-to-day basis, we're talking to these people. We know the kind of grants people we can get, and we can guide them on that.
Yeah.
And potentially, if they're not eligible for grants, we could also guide them on things like financing. So it doesn't have to be a scary big number up front. You could turn that into a lease. So there's lots of different options that, if you make sure you have the right partners in place, I make that probably sound easier than it is finding the right partner. But we'd definitely be keen to help people, and we can start even just asking questions and helping people realise the kind of information that they can get from colleagues from internally and start having those conversations.
Right.
And kind of prompt the right things to be thinking about.
And I would say just finally, obviously talk to Drax. Pick up the phone, talk to Drax. But it's do this homework and this planning before you start the procurement process, because you can help shape what that procurement process looks like. Don't hamstring yourself at the very beginning by focusing too much on the hardware and not enough on the back office software and the maintenance and the whole picture, making sure it hangs together properly.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and you mentioned maintenance there as well. I think maintenance is such a huge thing. You just want to make sure that you've considered all the elements, and there will be partners out there that will look to guide you through that process. So try and engage partners as soon as you can, and they should be pushing you in the right direction or leading you.
Great. And talk to Drax.
Absolutely. Talk to Drax.
James, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you. I hope we get the opportunity to speak again. I'm keen to hear more about your back office and kind of how to maximise the value of a back office as well. So maybe we'll pick up in the future about that.
Definitely.
And thank you to Drax Energy Solutions for joining GreenFleet Talks. And of course, thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.